Okay, so distinguished gentlemen, very briefly, as we start this program, I want to declare that I have no interest to declare. We would be talking about overweight and obesity. It's important for us to look at some brief definitions of the subject matter. Overweight and obesity are defined as abnormal or excessive accumulation of fat, which may impair health. It's a complex and chronic condition. This second definition points to that fact. And as our presenters will go on today to show us, it's really a complex situation for which we need to approach it with all of the resources we have. It's also chronic. It's not a very simple thing to tell people to lose weight, as we will see with the other presentations. So I want us to remember that obesity is a complex and chronic condition, and it adversely affects health due to excess accumulation of body fat. Typically, obesity or overweight is based on the body mass index. It's one of the simplest indexes that we use as a weight for height. We use it commonly to indicate overweight and obesity, and is defined as the person's body weight in kilograms divided by the square of his height in meters. Now, BMI provides the most useful population level measure of overweight and obesity because it's the same for both males and females, and also holds true for most of the ages of adults. There are some other measurements that are used, but by and large, BMI has proved to be the most useful population level measure of overweight and obesity. So we'll be using quite a lot of that in our discussion today. It's, however, a rough guide because it does not correspond to the same level of fatness in different individuals. There are people whose BMI is high, and it does not necessarily indicate the same level of fatness as we'll see. But generally, based on WHO criteria, anyone with a body mass index of equal to or more than 25 is assumed to be overweight, while someone with a body mass index of 30 and above is obese. And this is definition for adults. This is slightly different for children for obvious reasons. In children less than 5 years, we use child growth standards to assess that. And overweight is any weight for height that is more than 2 standard deviations above the WHO child growth standards for that individual child, while obesity is the weight for height that is more than 3 standard deviations above the growth standard median. Now, this is important for us, and you will have to use the standard charts to be able to estimate whether the child who is under 5 is actually obese or overweight. For children who are between 5 to 19 years old, there are different growth standards that are used. And for them, overweight is defined as a BMI age that is more than 1 standard deviation above the WHO growth reference. While those who are obese, that diagnosis is made when there are 2 standard deviations above the WHO growth reference medians. These are all important for us to know. We are setting the stage, so it's important for us to know that worldwide, obesity has nearly tripled over the last 40 years. Currently, more than 800 million people around the world are living with obesity. And the interesting fact is that most of the world's population is actually living in countries where overweight and obesity kills more people than underweight. For most of recorded history, underweight has been a bigger cause of death as a part of malnutrition compared to overweight and obesity until this last decade or so. Children are not left out. More than 38 million children who are under the age of 5 are either overweight or obese by 2019 data. Now, these facts include the sense for us to note that childhood obesity is on the increase, and it's expected to increase by over 60% in the next decade. And so we'll be talking of not just under 40 million children, but 250 million children by the year 2020 are expected to be struggling with childhood obesity. These have huge medical consequences. The cost estimate is by 2025, we'll be spending globally about $1 trillion on some of these consequences, which further speakers will highlight. We must note that obesity is a disease and must be treated as one. So elements of that will come out in the presentation. Obesity is also preventable. In other words, it's a preventable disease. We have a professor of human nutrition going to speak on some of those elements later on in the presentation. Here in Nigeria, obesity is on the rise. You can see from this trend line between 2004 and 2018 or so, we've had increase in percentage of adults living with obesity in Nigeria from just over 5% to almost 10%. This is staggering. And when you look at the combination of overweight and obesity together, we're talking of well over 25% of adults living with overweight or obesity in Nigeria by 2018 data. This is disturbing. This has very serious consequences, as we said. Raised BMI is a major risk factor for many non-communicable diseases. And one of the problems we are facing in this part of the world among low and middle income countries is the fact that we are having an epidemic of non-communicable diseases while we have not yet controlled the infectious causes of diseases. So we have a double burden of disease. Now, cardiovascular diseases, heart disease and stroke especially, diabetes mellitus, you see the confluence beginning to emerge, musculoskeletal disorders, particularly osteoarthritis, and several types of cancers spanning all types of specialties, endometrial cancer, breast cancer, ovarian, prostate, etc., are all linked to body mass index as a major risk factor. So whether overweight or obese, these are major risk factors for these health consequences. In children, childhood obesity also has significant effects. One, we know that any child who is obese has a higher chance of being obese as an adult, has a higher chance of premature death as an adult, as well as various types of disabilities. But even in childhood, those obese children are more likely to struggle with breathing difficulties, increased risk of fractures, hypertension, insulin resistance, which is setting the stage for type 2 diabetes later on, as well as many psychological effects that mental health practitioners struggle to cope with. So childhood obesity also comes with very significant health consequences. This is the era of COVID. We must remember that people living with obesity are twice as likely to be hospitalized if they test positive for COVID-19. In addition, most of the data seems to indicate that they are more likely to then develop severe disease, as well as in most settings, people who are obese are also more likely to die. Mortality tends to be higher in most of the data from many of the places where COVID-19 exists. So this is really something that's quite significant for us and quite timely for us to be discussing. Economists from the US said obesity is a prison. In the US, for example, he noticed that they spend more to treat type 2 diabetes each year than they spend on education. This is very significant, and for us, we need not wait until we have this type of data before we rise to the occasion. So I want to welcome all of us to this program. Having set the stage, at this point, it is my privilege to invite Professor Madaki, who will share on the next point. Professor Madaki is a professor of family medicine, like I said. He is in the University of Jos and Jos University Teaching Hospital. He also serves as the Vice President for West African College of Physicians, Nigeria chapter. He is also the chair of the Society of Family Physicians of Nigeria Practice-Based Research Network. He comes with lots of experience in teaching, in research, in practice, and I'm sure he would help us to understand this confluence of two pandemics. Professor Madaki, you are welcome.